Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you guys stopping by very much. So as you guys may or may not know, I literally just found out when I turned my computer on a little while ago that they are having Aimchess U.S. Rapid as part of the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour. And so we have in the first round Magnus Carlsen, world champion Magnus Carlsen, versus world 960 Fisher random world champion Wesley. So I was pretty excited, that we had a tournament rolling going on. So we will see how things go. But for my people that are in Nepal, namaste to you, Kecha. Nxg3 is in this tournament. So like when I first saw the tournament, I was like, man, I don't even have to go back in the past and try to find a game. I'm just going to pretty much wait until they play their game. So probably either today or tomorrow, I'll be able to kind of get that video in. So I got you. All my people that are coming from the Philippines, I will say mabuhay to you. Kamusta na? Aking makaibigan. Masaya ko makikinig muli magandang hapon. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Maraming salamat aking makaibigan. Anybody who is coming from Norway, I will say God morgen. Hello and tusen tak. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by, taking a look at my stuff. Appreciate it very much. If you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So we got D4. Knight comes to F6. Double check that. All right, cool. And so we have an Indian game. And I'll show you guys in a second. It kind of resembles a few different openings, but I mean, this is just a straight Indian game right now. Bang. So we have C4. We got E6. Bishop comes to F4, and we see D5. So as you guys can see, any of you guys that play like, this as the white side, or, like this looks like a Queen's Gambit declined, or like possible type of like semi-Slav or Slav, or, like a Catalan or something like that. But it also kind of has like a London, type of feel to it, when you're bringing this bishop to F4. So it's kind of like a little hybrid opening, but we got pawn takes D5, and as crazy as it sounds, knight takes D5 is the novelty of the game. Like, we are 4 moves into the game, and yes, we have just reached the novelty. The only games in the database, or game in the database, was like from like 1969, and it was pawn takes E5. So, a little exchange situation there. But like I said, we do have knight takes D5, which is the novelty. So crazy that it just took 4 moves. Bishop back to G3. Of course, we don't want to just lose the bishop. And then there's C5. And you guys, you guys always know when I show these games, man, C5 is going to come almost always. When you have this D4, C4 situation rolling, a lot of the time C5 is going to come and try to break that down. Try to trade this wing pawn for this central pawn. We got E4, throwing a little tempo on the knight. We got knight back to F6, and then we do have knight to D2. And just looking at the position real quick, for those of you that are wondering, this actually is a pawn for black. And they have 2 ways that they can capture back. Like the most logical, well, not the most logical, like the strongest is going to be pawn takes D4. And then, you might see E5, knight coming to D5, knight G to F3. You really want to be careful because you don't really want to move this knight because bishop to B4 can come. You also have some H5 situations and stuff. It's just looking good for black. Instead of pawn takes D5, you actually have the ability, you can take with the queen. You are going to be subject to tempos, after this or something like that. Well, no, not immediately, because you have this pawn hanging. So as you can see, there's a little bit of issues that white has in their position. So this is definitely, not the soundest. Magnus Carlsen isn't known for having like the strongest openings ever. Like, he's definitely a middle game and an end game guy. So, like I said, after knight to D2, we do see knight to C6. Wesley so just decides he's going to go ahead and just play solid with it. We got E5, knight comes back to D7, knight G to F3. Pawn takes D4, we got bishop to C4. And so temporarily black has a pawn, but it's not a pawn that they're going to be able to really hold on to. We see bishop to E7, we got castles by white, castles by black. The rook comes over to C1. It's a fully open file. So, it makes, a whole lot of sense to put the rook on it. We got knight down to C5. We see A3. We don't want to see any knight to B4 situations coming up. We got A5. Knight comes to b3. So we offer a trade of the knights, which, I mean, is one of the top moves to do, like something like this or something like that. But that's not what we see in the game. We actually see b6. And this allows white to get their pawn back now. So knight takes d4, knight b takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and we got bishop down to b7. We got knight to b5. You know, we're not really worried about the trade of queens here. That's just going to bring our rook into open file. So, you know, black is just going to be pretty much helping white with that trade. Knight comes to e4. We see knight to d6. And this is a really lodged in there knight, man. You know, you definitely don't want to take with the knight because you're going to give white a pass pawn. And I mean, this piece on d6 is kind of annoying. So the queen comes to b8, sidestepping any, like, you know, discoveries or any type of issues. Queen comes up to d4. So, you know, I mean, white is definitely, white is a little bit further ahead than black is. I mean, you know, black is kind of in a defensive position. You know, they got this, white has this beautiful knight. You know, this queen kind of needs to go somewhere like a little bit more active. So, yeah, white is definitely in the driver's seat. We got b5. Bishop takes b5, knight takes g3. We see pawn takes g3, bishop to d5. So this is kind of nice because this is plugging, you know, this you know, this file up. Also, you know, we're threatening bishop takes d6. I mean, this bishop is going to be dropping, so we got to be careful. So bishop comes to c6, bishop takes d6, pawn takes d6. We see rook over to a6, and this is like super accurate, man, because, like, I mean, you can always just trade here, but the problem is you're going to be trading, and then the rook is going to take, and, you know, like I said, white is up a pawn. And so this queen is holding this square. So a nice solution to try to put a little bit more pressure is rook to a6, because then now you're double attacking this bishop, and something has to give. So when bishop takes on d5, black actually has a really nice move, which is rook takes d6. And you know, this is getting the pawn back, and also it's pinning this bishop. So, you know, that's a little bit of an annoying situation. So Wesley, so even though he's down a little bit, he did kind of make it a little bit annoying for Magnus Carlsen. Rook takes c5, rook takes d5, rook takes d5, pawn takes d5, queen takes d5, queen takes b2. And now you have queen takes a5. And, I mean, the unfortunate thing about the situation for black is, like, you know, white, you know, they just have a completely passed pawn on the a file. So, I mean, this is pretty much something that's going to just, like, you know, kind of dictate what goes on for the rest of the game. Like, you know, white is, like, basically playing like, hey, man, I got this advantage type deal, you know. So g6 comes, you know, we're creating some bluff for our king. Queen comes to b4, and we would really, really love to trade pieces here. As you guys will see coming up, like, it doesn't, the position is almost very similar, so it doesn't really make a difference. But, you know, of course, if you took on b4 with the queen, you take with the pawn, you know, you might see rook to b8 and then rook to b1. And, I mean, this is just a very dominant position for white. You know, they're going to be able to get their king in a good position, and they're going to be able to start attacking pawns. And this rook is just pretty much going to live on b8. Like, you know, it's not great. So this is just, you know, like, a lot of players could just kind of look at this position and say, oh, this is one. Like, you know, you're going to end up bringing the king way over here. You're going to trade these rooks to take this pawn. And then this king is going to creep over here and start grabbing these pawns. And it's just good. So after queen came to b4, we saw queen to f6. We got a4. Rook comes to c8, and we got a5. So as you can see, this pawn is pretty fast, man. It's rolling. So we got h5. Queen comes to a4. We see rook to c6. And then we've actually reached a point in the game that Wesley, Magnus Carlsen, like, you know, he comes up with a really nice idea in this position. So if you want to go ahead and pause the video and try to guess what he played, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So, I mean, it's not like an explosive move or anything like that. And it's actually not the top move in the position. But it has a very, like, logical idea behind it. And that move is queen to a1. As I tell you guys all the time, when you are up material, you always want to try to see if, like, a trade is going to benefit you. And this definitely is a situation where, you know, you do want to get the queens off the board, because then you're going to end up being in a position, like I mentioned before, where you just have a outside pass pawn. So, like, I mean, you know, outside pass pawns are much better than having, like, a central pass pawn, because they're just further from the king. So we actually see king to g7, and then we have rook over to b1. And Wesley so goes into the queen trade that Magnus Carlsen really wants. Queen takes a1, rook takes a1. We got rook to a6. So as you guys can kind of see, we have a very similar position that we had earlier, but the pawn is a lot farther away. So before we had this position here with the pawn being on the b file, you know, now we have the rook to a6, or now we have the pawn on the a file. So it's just a little bit more beneficial. But I mean, ultimately, it didn't really matter what you did. It's going to be beneficial for white. We got f3 because we want the king to have like this direct, you know, we're hoping to maybe at some point come over here with the king and attack this rook. We want to force this rook back so that we can just basically immobilize it with pawn push to a7. We got king to f6. We see king to f2, king to e5, king to e3. So the kings are doing their opposition situation. We see king to d5, king up to f4. And, you know, white is starting to try to creep in. Black is not trying to allow the trajectory that I just showed a second ago. It's not trying to allow the king to just come up and just attack the rook on b5. So white is saying, hey, I'll go ahead and go over here and start trying to grab your pawns then. You know, I'm going to win some kind of way. We got f6, we got g4. Pawn takes g4, and then a very accurate king takes g4, making sure our pawn chain is good. And, you know, we pretty much just have these two pawns against these two pawns. King comes to e5. We got f4 with check. King comes up to e6. We see rook to a2. King comes to e7. We see king down to f3. King to d6. We got king to e4. King comes to e6. Rook comes down to a1. We see king over to d6. You know, we don't really want to push the pawn here. Because, I mean, this pawn is going to be pretty much freezing these pawns. And then you always have, like, some type of reserve tempo with this pawn. So you can always kind of waste the move to, you know, kind of, you know, throw the move, you know, to black. So, like, for example, like I said, I mean, you know, if you did have f5 check, I mean, you know, the king would move over here. And you can oppose him with your king. But the problem is you're going to have this reserve tempo here. And, I mean, now what do? Like, you're in a zugzwang as black. Because you can't push this pawn. Like, the king, if you move either way, like, this king is going to outflank the king. So if you do this, you're going to do this. You know, if the king goes over here, you're going to do this. And now it's like you're just, you know, you're just penetrating into the position. And so, I mean, it's just looking nice. So, like I said, we do have king to d6. We got f5, which is, like, you know, really just basically asking black, like, do you want to push your pawn or do you want to trade? So black actually goes into the trade. Like, really neither way was going to, like, be beneficial that much for you. So you were pretty much in the zugzwang situation anyway. King takes f5. King comes up to e8. We see king to g6. King comes to e6. We got rook to e1 with check. So now we've, like, abandoned our pawn on the a file. King comes up to d7, and we see g4. We're not worried about what this scenario would be, because if the rook takes, we got king takes, and this pawn is not going to be very... you can't stop this pawn. You know, and this rook is completely cutting off this king and making it impossible to come over. So that's just too beneficial. So after g4, we see king up to d8. King comes to f7. We see rook to d6. Rook comes to e4. We see rook over to c6. We see rook to d4 with check. King comes to c8. And then we see rook to f4. And it is in this position that Wesley so resigns the game. Like I said, I mean, there's nothing that you can really do in this position. I mean, you have this pawn that you have to try to worry about. You have this pawn that's just about to drop off the board. So, like, you're going to be in a situation where, you know, the rook is going to take this pawn and you're still going to have two pawns as white. And that's just not something that you could win. Like, you know, a lot of times you might be up a pawn or something in a rook endgame. But, I mean, when you're up two pawns against a rook, it's almost like, I mean, unless it's a miracle and you just happen to, like, magically draw the game somehow, like, it's just pretty much going to be over with. So, you know, like I said, I mean, black is just in a position that there aren't really a lot of good moves to make. You know, you move the rook over here. This rook is going to tell you got this. But, I mean, like, you know, you got one of these deals. I mean, you could try to check. But, I mean, it's just going to be in this. The situation is going to be where you're going to be able to push this pawn to victory. So it's not going to be. Or actually, I think it might be better. Let's do that. Because, I mean, you're definitely threatening rook here. And then the king is going to move down. And then you're going to be threatening this. And you're just going to be in a king and pawn versus king endgame. So there's, like, many different options and stuff like that. So, yeah, that was unfortunately that first game. So I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. A king Qb8. And tusen talk to my people that are coming from Norway. And Nd2 Nc6, whoever is coming from Nepal. And I will see you guys next time.